Welcome, skeptics and truth seekers, to Schoolhouse Crock, the podcast that fearlessly exposes the real deal behind education in the state of Colorado. I'm your host, Stacey Castile, and on this show, we are not here to sugarcoat. We are here to unveil the truth, challenge the norms, and unpack the crock of you-know-what that often goes unnoticed in the realm of education. On this week's episode, I have guest Frank Freeman. Frank, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. My name's Frank Freeman. I've lived here in Northern Colorado for nearly 20 years now. Married to my high school sweetheart, Lynette, for 22 years, and I have two teenagers, a boy and a girl, and we homeschool our children. So right now we are homeschooling, but my son will be starting ninth grade next year. So we're kind of in a transition moment right now.
And so you won't be homeschooling him next year then?
Correct. So we'll homeschool my daughter for her senior year, and my son, he will then be going to public.
Excellent. Then you do volunteering in the community.
Well, yeah, for the past, 15 years now, I've been a volunteer coach for football and basketball and a little bit of soccer. So here in Greeley, I've coached my kids primarily through flag football, through tackle football. My daughter actually plays tackle football since sixth grade, and then both of them played basketball as well. So right now, currently coaching high school football. I'm going on my fourth season right now. And I've sat on a few boards with the city as far as with the art community and visited several meetings. So I've been a little active. And then I recently ran for city council as well.
Here in Greeley.
Yes.
With volunteering as a coach, what do you feel like is the most rewarding part for you?
Well, that's a great question. I think I get the most payback just seeing how the kids turn out and what influence that I could have in a positive way on their life. So a lot of things are kind of happening and converging during the season. And so, they can have things at school going on, things in their family happening, a lot of those things kind of converging. And here we are trying to play a sport together. So we're learning a lot together, but I think the most rewarding is actually seeing them achieve something personal and just be truly great at what they do, and then kind of reaping the reward of all that hard work that they've put in. I'm seeing that a lot in the high school right now because I'm dealing with kids all the way from their freshman year to their senior year. And they're kind of like, they start out not knowing what's going on. And then now they're a senior and they're freaking out about, okay, what's going to happen now? I gotta transition into adulting. And so kind of being a part of that. And then later on seeing the parents and they're saying, hey, little Johnny is now finishing up college or he's married and has a kid. You hear those things and it's just so rewarding to like kind of see that you had a part in that.
I bet. And I know that when you were running for city council, you went to a couple of forums and you had a couple of students show up and talked about how awesome it was just to see them kind of get involved and start to understand how that process goes.
Yeah, we had one day at practice, it was two separate, but they said, hey, we saw your signs up in town. And we had a conversation about civics in our class and how civics works in the city of Greeley. And it was really cool for them because they hadn't, a lot of times they'd say, hello, governor. Like they had absolutely no idea what I was even doing. And so teachers had an opportunity to explain to them what city council is and what the mayor does and how all that works together. So it was kind of cool going through that with them as well.
I bet because, one of the things that I've noticed in the last month, the Republican Party and I believe the Democratic Party have been going through the caucus process. And that's not a process that a lot of people understand as adults. So, and then let alone as kids, because, over the years, maybe that extent of civics has not been properly taught to the children or in full extent or anything that they really retained, right? And so then when I started going, so, you start off with your precinct meeting and then you go to your district and then the county. And I started to notice, specifically at the precinct meeting, there was no more than 3 people in each precinct. And so, you get up to depending how big your precinct is, but about 6 delegates to, continue going on and let their voices be heard. And we were so under the mark. And then when you looked at the room, truthfully, there was one kid, I would say he was probably 20. He was the youngest, and then the next was 30 something. So we're missing an entire
Absolutely.
generation. So then to see high school students to start to learn the process and understanding, I know even as a young adult myself, like I would be like, oh my gosh, it's already election time. There's already election signs up, and not understanding how that whole process went, and that there's primaries and the general election and all of those different elements to it. So it's great to see
Yeah.
someone inspire the kids to go and to learn more, and even if they are calling you governor, just that they're becoming more engaged in that
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. Well, and I had an interesting story. There was a young lady who, one of my daughter's friends, she's actually in high school, and she said, "Hey, I have a class in college, so she's kind of doing a dual thing, and she needed to get some time in with a political person. So she actually worked with me to form a lot of our message, came to a lot of our meetings, and kind of learned the process as we were going through it. So that was kind of neat to see her kind of mature through that and kind of learn more about the system in that way. We've also had some students say like, "Hey, I had really no idea that any of this was going on in the background." And so I hope that our schools can do more for that. I know it's difficult because even as an adult, it's kind of a complicated process.
Yes.
But it would be neat to see that out there more. It'd be neat too to see more political folks try to actively engage the young community and not just give words to it, but actually go out there and invite them in and do stuff that encourages them to take an active role in our politics.
And I definitely think that that's a major area where, not to get too political, granted, it is me. And according to certain school board members, everything that I say is a political statement. But I think that's something that the Democratic Party does a lot better. They are able to tap into that generation a lot better. I mean, granted, I'm no spring chick or anything, but even for me, like I don't know how I can get the younger kids more involved and like how to bring them in. And I have a daughter who's a junior in high school, and I mean she's not paying attention to anything that I've been doing over the last couple of weeks. I always just typically say like, oh, got a meeting, I have a meeting, I'll be back, kind of a thing. And so you're absolutely right, we do need to.
Well, I think going to where they are is a big one. Getting interested in what they're interested in, not just making them get interested in us. That says a lot because then they know that you care about what they're doing. And there's a lot of avenues to do that we as adults just don't do. We're too busy with our job and taking care of our family and paying our bills.
Yes.
Uh, you mentioned both parties. There's a group of people who tend to get out there and they're more available to do that. And so I'm at work. I got stuff to do. It's very hard. I totally get like a lot of people can't do that. And this last campaign was a lot of work and a huge undertaking, as I know you experienced as well. So
Yes, for
I
sure.
get that, and it's a very difficult thing to overcome.
It definitely is. And then also, like how to relate to people. For example, how to get like the messaging across. In 2020, my daughter had made a video and she's like, I wish Donald Trump wasn't the president because he's causing so much divisiveness and Black Lives Matter or whatever. And that's not a mindset that we have in our household at all. And so it was like, wow, that ideology is even able to get to my child under my roof without me realizing it. And how do I do a better job at having these conversations with her and exposing her to like, well, let's look at it from this angle too. Or, that's maybe the narrative that's trying to be pushed, but that's not necessarily the truth.
Well, we had a time of the first Black president, and a lot of that conversation stopped around race, uh, racial talk. So there was not a lot of progress, in my opinion, made during that time. Everyone just accepted that, hey, we're good. And then
We
magic,
were all like, hey, we have the token black president.
right?
We're fine. We're
And
not
then
racist.
magically,
Look.
he's not a president anymore, and everything comes back, and everything's horrible and miserable again. So what happened? Well, I would argue to say that with the next president, 45, we actually had more conversations. And whether you disagree with him or not, and that's not really my position right now, there was more conversation about how do we deal with each other. And me personally, with my campaign and my own personal beliefs, I tend to want to be more about what are we more alike? What brings us together? Why are we more similar? Not focusing on what the media and what politics tries to do is separate and divide and conquer. We need to come together as a people and talk about what we agree on so we can move the ball forward.
I agree, and I think too that that's one of the things is like, I think that the politicians that are, currently in office or have been in office for a while see the benefits of having the separation. I mean, the class separation, the race separation, as long as the people are fighting together, they can't start to realize maybe what you're doing or what you're really about because they're so distracted with how am I going to pay my bills and how am I, going to work with my neighbors or whatever the case may be. And then they're not focusing on other things. And then it's easier to even continue to push that narrative onto the kids of saying, see, look, this is a problem. And if you don't see eye to eye on this, then that means you're, racist or you're a bigot or, whatever, instead of saying like, well, let's sit down. How do you look at both angles? How do you both look at both sides? And
Well, and to the average family just here in town, what what is more important? Worrying about what's going on in Washington as far as whether they like you or not personally, or can I put food on my table? Does my job cover with the inflation that's happening, cover all my bills and feeding my family? Can I pay my mortgage? Right now, our food costs doubled
yeah,
in this last 4 years. So to me, that's confronting me personally right up front. And so regardless of all these other issues that they want to distract us with, the bottom line is my family is very important to me. My community is very important. And can we survive through all of what's happening with our money and our finances?
agreed. And I think it's a great opportunity too, because it's like, if you kind of talked about inflation, well, we could also, throw in the conversation of minimum wage with that, right? Because those definitely go hand in hand. And the messaging of, "Oh, we have to increase minimum wage because I can't survive off of it," and, like, I was able to have those conversations, and say, "Well, okay, yeah, let's say the person at McDonald's deserves a raise, but just because the person at McDonald's is getting a raise, so is the person who's making the hamburger buns. And if the hamburger buns, company has to now pay their workers more, then they're going to start charging McDonald's more for their hamburger buns. And then McDonald's is going to turn around and start charging you more. And now we're paying more for a Happy Meal than what we originally were. And so then it eats up any type of a raise you got by increasing the minimum wage. And being able to explain that, and I've seen with my daughter specifically, as she goes into the government class and some of these civics classes in high school, she's able to have some of those arguments for her as opposed to, yeah, we need to raise minimum wage. Well, yeah, that sounds great and everything, but she's starting to see some
Yeah,
of the
somebody's got to pay for it.
cause and effects of that.
Well, yeah, definitely. But I think if, bottom line is what is the cause of the desire to raise minimum wage other than the fact that I want to make more money is, well, we have spending that's completely out of control that no matter what, we can keep raising incomes. It's just going to keep snowballing.
Yeah,
It's like the ship is sinking and do we keep bucketing out or do we try to plug the hole?
agreed. Agreed. I don't think that a lot of people in our community take the time like you do to volunteer and work with our children and try to be a inspirational kind of person in their life, a solid person. Everybody always talks about that one teacher that was a major influence on them. And I think that when we have community members like yourself who take the time out of your lives, take the time for granted you are coaching your children from your families essentially. What do you wish that more community members realized about volunteering with kids?
Well, that's an interesting question, and it's a good one. I mean, what's the biggest takeaway from it? Well, I feel just basically a reward in seeing them win. I play basketball during lunchtime. Us old guys, we have some young guys show up too, and I take great pride when I can beat a 20-year-old, but it rarely happens anymore. But one thing I've told them, like some of the kids that get very upset, and I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm out here working hard because I want to see you get better. And that's what I take to the coaches field is I want to see them succeed. And I think like in our community, more people getting involved with our youth, that's the future of our towns. And if we're not putting in and investing in them, we're not going to have as nice of an outcome. And I think for me, if I know that I took an active part in helping the next generation, and then I could be happy for that turnout. And, I have some responsibility in it. Now, if I didn't do a darn thing and then I sit around and complain about it,
Yeah.
what good is that? So I want to take an active role, and I encourage others to do that. I think it's very fulfilling.
I definitely agree. Every generation thinks that the younger generation's lazy and they're not willing to do anything. But like, what are we doing to try and motivate them and to encourage them and get
Yeah.
them off their video games, get them out from in front of the TV and have them get out and go and do stuff and learn stuff. And even if it's sports, you learn so much from sports than what you would just staying at
Oh,
home.
yeah. Well, I had a conversation with the fire department and talking to them about how football in Greeley was basically essentially canceled for anyone under seventh grade, I believe it was. They got rid of the city sports for tackle football, and they were in shock for that. And I said, like, we're heavily into that, and it just went away during COVID. And they were in shock because they were thinking of all the stuff that they do that directly correlates to sports. And that was one more sport now that's not as actively undertaken. I think that's definitely an area that we have to stay focused on. There's lots of areas where kids can learn to be a better person, a better citizen. But I think also as an active member of your community, there's so much that the different generations can teach the younger generation. Matter of fact, at work, okay, I'm 45 years old, but we hire a lot of people who are fresh out of college, and I do a lot of data and programming. Those folks are their first job, second job. They literally have no idea what the workforce is really about. So it's nice when we have other people of different generations that can kind of impart that this is how we do. Like, you're not going to show up and be the CEO next week. There's a progression.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of maturity starts to happen because it kind of like the older generation can kind of impart that on the younger generation and help them to mature in a proper way.
Agreed. And I think too, like with the importance of sports or something along those lines, it also teaches you the role of responsibility. And yes, you're going to wake up on days where you don't want to go to work. You don't want to do the work or whatever that is, whether it's go to football practice or whether it's show up for your job. And these programs help teach kids of just that fulfillment of when you don't wanna go, but you still put in the work and the effort, like, how rewarding that feels
Yeah.
afterwards. This is something that my husband just recently encountered at his job. One of his younger men just didn't go to, something that he was supposed to do for work. He didn't feel good,
Mm.
but he didn't, like, tell anybody either until, like, almost too late kind of a thing. The first thing I said to him was, "How old is he?" And he's like, "He's 19." I'm like, "Okay, well, now this is you having to take him under your wing and say,
Mhm.
hey, that's not gonna fly. I don't know if this kid was trying to go for this, but your mom and dad can't excuse you from this. Like, this isn't like not going to
Yeah.
English class, not going to football practice. This is the real world." But when you have a coach who's there and invests their time in you, then it's gonna also make you want to put in
Most
your
definitely.
best and how to move on. Welcome back to my conversation with Frank Freeman. You had mentioned that you are currently doing homeschooling and then also preparing for public school. How do you find it easiest to adjust to both of your kids' needs and wants when it comes to their education? Because we know not all kids learn the same. Is that something that you guys have had to learn? And how do you learn that? What advice do you have for anybody who is considering homeschooling?
Well, biggest advice that or thing I could say is homeschooling. It's pretty wild and it's pretty challenging. And for anyone to say, and I'm going to get handed off to my wife, that she has really stuck to this and nailed it. And I don't think that's something that I could have done. And so some people think, oh yeah, the kids are just at home and hanging out and whatnot. This is a full-time job and teachers get paid to do this job. So it is a serious thing. And I have to give respect for people who will homeschool. So the consideration, a lot of times, we were thinking schools mainly for girls, and they kind of cater it towards girls in some ways and less towards boys. Whether that's true or not, young men get antsy. They need to go do stuff. They need to get up and move around. Maybe they learn a little differently. Well, we can cater our education to my daughter or to my son. My daughter is extremely motivated, and I feel like she kind of doesn't even need me half the time, to be honest. But my son, yeah, he's the baby boy. He needs some help, and there's different areas where they might be stronger in, like, whereas at public school they would get left behind. And this is not a slam on public school, it's just if you have 20, 30 kids, you cannot just stop for the one kid who's a challenge, whether he's misbehaving or just has a learning disability or whatever that is. It's hard to stop for that one person. Well, we can cater our education to that child. And okay, you're really strong in math, but your motor skills aren't good. Okay, we can cater our work to hit heavy on that. And so also we had a short-term plan. It was every year was like, hey, let's just see how this goes. And then we can quit at any time. We were not so sold that this is how life has to be. And so my daughter loves it and was like, both kids are in the schools. They have friends everywhere. There's no issue of socialization. In fact, we can get the kind of socialization that's great and leave out the socialization that's dangerous. And my son now is like, hey, I want to go have the full experience. Well, we're not holding him back. We're just preparing him for that. So now next year he will go be a freshman and see how that goes. And we'll see if he wants to stick that out or if he's going to want to come back home, but he has that option to do that now.
You'd made the comment about if someone's not getting something. One of the things that actually happens here in Greeley-Evans District 6 is because there's multiple schools throughout the district. And all first graders learned the exact same thing today. Every elementary school, whether the children got this stuff yesterday or not, they learned the same thing today. So there is no time for, I don't know what to tell you if you didn't get that. We're moving on because we have to stay on track. Their thinking is that if a student transfers from one school to another, so one first grade class to another, that they will still be all on the same page. But if the child was behind, it's not going to make a difference, whether or not. And so I do think that that is one thing that I went to a really small school and 20 kids in a class. That was a
Wow.
big, big class for us. And that wasn't very common. And so when you didn't get things, it wasn't that hard for the teacher to take you to the back of the room and work with you one-on-one while the rest of the class, continued going on because they were getting it or whatever. And I can definitely see how that would be beneficial in homeschooling to be able to take that time to say, hey, yep, and maybe it's not even like we're going to work on this for the next 4 hours. It's like, okay, we know that this is a struggle. We can come back to this. We can keep working on this and not have to be like, okay, next, next,
We can
next.
get up and you can get up and go shoot some hoops outside and come back in just at a random moment, just to kind of loosen things up and come back and get back to work. And that's a beauty of being able to do that.
I did my bachelor's and my master's degree all online and did not go into a classroom at all for it. So in my mind, that's kind of like the same thing as homeschooling because I basically,
Sure.
read the notes, read the text that was given by the professors and so on. And I definitely felt like for me, that was so much better than making me sit in a classroom because yes, there was times where I had to be like, "All right, I gotta buckle down and I gotta do my work right now. I can't mess around." But also, if I was having a day where I'm like, my cat died or, something, I could be in my feelings and not have to try to force myself to focus on school. And I think that's something that we don't do for our kids enough, even in the mornings, right? If my kids wake up in the morning and they're having a rough morning, right? Well, I don't care. Get dressed. Let's go. We got to get going. We ain't got time for this. I don't know how many times I say this. Like,
Ain't nobody got time for
yes, I'm sorry that you're a teenage girl and you have no clothes and you have nothing to wear and your hair's a mess and, or you're a little boy who just wants to play with your Legos all day. We got to get to school. Let's go. Let's go. And that just starts them off on a terrible foot as opposed to being able to be like, you know what? Hey, let's take 20 minutes. Let's just have a breather. Let's, try to figure out because, right, there's typically something else going on underlining that emotion or those outbursts. And
Well, there's a lot of opportunities too. Like, one, we can go on vacations, not at the time everyone else does, right?
Yes,
We
yes.
don't have snow days. We don't have teacher in service days. I guess an in service day could be his mom is sick and there's no stuff. Um, there's a lot of opportunities for that. There's opportunities for like music lessons and piano lessons and those sorts of things that we can take time to do that and have unlimited availability to do that a lot of kids don't get to because our schedule's a little bit more flexible.
Well, and I think too, it helps you to cultivate your lessons towards them. Are they a hands-on learner? Are they an audio learner? How do they learn best? And then cultivating your lessons towards that to help them. I mean, you could not do that for 25
Sure.
students at all.
The final thing too is like, you mentioned your education. I have a master's degree, bachelor's degree, blah, blah, blah. Lynette does too. My wife does too. And she chose to stay home and take it upon herself to educate our children. And so when people have like, why would you do that? Well, she could be out there making her figures if she wanted to, but it was very important to us as a family that we build our children into the right kind of people. And we felt like that was something as a family we could do.
I agree. I think that is definitely commendable. Shout out to Lynette. She's awesome. And I agree. I mean, especially in today's society, right? Where I'm a strong, independent woman. I don't need nobody else. I'm not going to stay home with my kids. Now I'm sitting here going, oh my gosh, now I understand why women stayed home and did all this because there's so much to do. Like,
Yeah.
how do I balance all of this?
Yeah.
And we also had this ideology that the public school was the best option for our kids. And that may be the best option for some kids, right? But like, it's not a one size fits all like the way that it's kind of portrayed to be. And so I think that when we start to look at that, like, what are some of our values? What are some of the experiences that we've seen come out of public schools? My cousins were homeschooled. And even though they were my cousins and I love them to death, I still was like, that's the weirdest thing ever. You don't know what it's like to have a locker, like just weird things like that, that seems so common for public school and not for them. But I do think, there are a lot of advantages to the homeschooling and how to be able to feed into your children to help provide them and not entrusting them in strangers' hands for at least 8 hours a day. And not only is it a different stranger every year, right? As they move up and they have a new teacher, but then there's different specials teachers, different lunch people, all of these different strangers that are around your children. And you have to assume that they all have the best interests in mind for your kid. And in a perfect world would be the way, but that's honestly not and even if they're not like a predator or something, but like if they have an ideology that doesn't match up to yours, if they're not a Christian believer and you are, how is that going to affect your child?
Yeah,
And
heavy influence over your child. They're in a
yes.
position of trust, and you're entrusting them as the parent. Yeah, it can be a scary position. Look at your kids. I mean, think of yourself, even, I guess, to start. How many times did something not go right as a child, and you were thinking, wow, now what I know now, I would have probably told my parent,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
And then you think of your own children. Well, my daughter's very communicative. She'll tell us everything. My son's kind of like, hey, how was your day?
Mm.
Ah, that's what we get. So there's a level of insecurity for me, just like, okay, now he's going into public school. And we've been really working on, let's get this communication up more. Like, he'll talk if it's all fun stuff or with his friends, he's a chatterbox. But when it's serious stuff, it's kind of like very limited. And so, yeah, we got to work on that.
One of the things I think that I struggle with the most, because my daughter is the same way. She's very quiet. Sometimes she can be chatty Cathy and stuff. It depends on the subject. Typically, you ask her, like, oh, how was this? So she'll say, not that bad. I'm like, so not that good either, right? Like, is that what that means? But it's been trying to empower her to stand up and say something or to notice things that
Sure.
aren't quite right. Like, hey, this doesn't seem right to you, right? Okay, then say something to the teacher, to an adult. How do you empower her? Because if they're not that communicative with you about what's going on, are they going to advocate for
Sure.
themselves and be communicative for
Mhm.
themselves in
That's a
that
good point.
aspect? there's a lot of times I try to coach her, like, saying, like, "Okay, well, wait a minute," like, she'll, message me like, "Oh, this teacher is just being ridiculous," and I'm like, "Then you need to tell her, or you need to tell your guidance counselor or something," and advocating that way. They were doing argumentative essays, and they read, part of the, essay, Ethnic Hash, and it's talking about how this girl is made up of a multitude of different ethnicities. And then they go online to the Home Depot paint page, and they're trying to match up their skin tone colors to paint swatches to see what color of paint they are.
Okay.
And, like, my daughter, she sends me a text. She's like, "I'm gilded." I'm like, "I don't think you're using that correctly." Like, this doesn't make sense. But it made her uncomfortable because then the teacher starts talking about how, because the girl in the story had some Black ethnicity in her, and she chose to identify as just plain Black. And the teacher starts talking about how she wishes, like, the white community was more like the Black community is, and all of this stuff. And my daughter's like, "I can't believe she's talking about this. This is craziness." She's basically saying that she wished she wasn't white. But it's just like trying to figure out how to empower your child to say, "No, I'm not going for this," but also not do it in a rebellious,
Sure. Be respectful about it.
insubordinate way. Yes,
It's
yes,
very difficult to be a teenager, especially, and have to talk to adults about serious.
yes. I don't even like to be an adult and talk to adults about serious things.
So I'll share a story with you. When I was young, I used to really get nervous and agitated during Black History Month. And I don't know if I shared that with you before, but basically in California when I was a kid, that month we'd have movies all the time showing basically what happens to Black people in the 60s and before, right? And while I think that was a
Rodney
very
King. Sorry.
yeah, there was that too. Yes, right around that time I was in high school. But so we would sit there and watch these movies, and while I think they were very valid, being one of not the only African American in the class, everyone would stare at me to see my reaction as these bad, horrific things were happening, and talk about embarrassing and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I would have to go through this every year when we would have this month. And so for me personally, I had wished I either wasn't there or was one of them while this was happening. So I understand the importance of that month, but it was also a little uncomfortable for my sister and I as we went through some of that stuff.
I bet. I bet. Especially because to me, granted, I don't know if I can truly speak about this as a white woman, but it makes me think that they're trying to tell you, get ready. This is what your life is going to be like. I hope you're ready for the fire hoses and all of the beatings
Yep.
and stuff. And that's also not the message that we need to be sending to our children. Yes, educate them. Like, this was a horrific thing that people did. Racism is not okay, but where we're at today, this is how we're trying to make these changes, and that's not what it's gonna be like. I don't know if this is the correct terminology, but, like, there's not that chip on your shoulder if you encounter even just a police officer. Devin's mom, I remember after the Michael Brown situation in Ferguson, and his mom was like, "Anytime you encounter a cop, you just put your hands up," and Devin was like, "Well, first of all, mom, I'm not breaking the law, okay? Like, I'm not stupid. Like, why are you even telling me
Yeah.
this?" I mean, he was 30 when this was going down, and it's just so sad that there's, like, I mean, I'm tell my kids, no matter their ethnicity, if you encounter the police, you do what they say. I don't even care how wrong they are. We will figure it out. Trust me, I will mama bear out for you. Just go along
You
with it.
cooperate and you treat them with respect
Yeah.
and you move on.
Yeah. But instead, it's like they're pushing this narrative of, like, I think Black History Month pushes the narrative of you'll never amount to anything because of the color of your skin. And therefore, we have to do all of this stuff to make you feel better about yourself because you're never going to amount to
Well,
anything.
and let's pause. I believe heavily in self-empowerment. So I have been a victim of some extreme racism when I was a kid, very much so. So much so that I gave all my toys to them for them to stop and they would not stop. So I've been a part of that, but I think that personally, we have to overcome that in ourselves too. Like we're not a lifetime victim to that behavior. We're able to maybe separate, like, this is those bad people.
Yes.
And there's a lot of other good people. There's a lot of white people in this world who have helped me become who I am today. So and then on top of that, I don't need someone to give their power to me for me to be great.
Yes.
So
Amen.
when we
Amen.
watch some of these shows and whatnot, I'm not, me personally, going to sit around and wait for someone to tell me I can. I'm going to go do. And that's what I think everybody should be about, is taking control of their life and their own power, and not waiting for someone perceived or being told that they're better than you to tell you when you can.
Yeah. Agreed. I definitely agree with that. And I think we need to start focusing more on like what you said, it's those people. It's that bad character. It's not a skin color characteristic. Just like we wouldn't say that all black people are thugs, right? To make those assumptions about either side, any race, any ethnicity is just wrong. And we need to stop that, and to stop that whole mentality of I, as a white woman, need to lower myself to make you as a black man feel more comfortable. I don't think that's right either. Like, I think that we should both be able to just go out and be ourselves. And this is who we are, and this is what you get, kind of a thing. And um, may the best man win kind of
Well, and
mentality.
let's add too, I don't think guilt changes anybody.
No.
So if you need to feel guilty, and we need to make people feel guilty about the past so that they change now, that's not going to change anybody. We have to change their hearts and their lives. And I think if I've seen people when I was a young adult, they behaved one way and they're totally different now. They've probably had conversations, experiences that have enlightened them to where maybe some of their thoughts were proven untrue. And I think that that's what we need to work towards more, is like changing hearts and minds and not guilting. Because if you're born today, as a white woman, white man, you have absolutely nothing to do with what happened, 200 years ago.
Yeah.
There's no way you have anything to do with that. And so guilting you into like treating someone like me better, that's not your heart. You're doing this because you feel guilty and need to do it.
Yeah.
And at any moment you can stop doing it, because in
Well,
your
and it
heart.
makes me think that if you do have that guilt, is it because you are actively still thinking that way? Because that's a guilty conscience, right? So if I feel like I need to give you the parking spot because you're a black man and you're at a disadvantage of getting that spot over me, a privileged white woman, is that because I think that I'm better than you? And so does that make sense? Like,
I joke with some of my buddies. I'm like, hey, Black History Month, I get to win every argument. So that it's just a bit of fun, but it's kind
yeah.
of funny. It's like, you owe me lunch and you let me win every argument.
My daughter tries to push Women's History Month. She's like, how dare you say that to me during Women's Month? And I'm like, first of all, I'm a woman too. So therefore, your argument is not valid at all. But that's fun. And I think we should have a sense of humor to some extent. I mean, if we can't laugh at ourselves and make fun of ourselves, then like, what good is life? Because you're obviously being way too serious.
Well, look at Saturday Night Live. That's why it's not funny anymore.
Yes, agreed, agreed. And I mean, I laugh at myself all the time too, because like I'm super clumsy. I fall all the time. I was walking through a room with a bunch of people and I had tripped and I fell onto this guy and he like helped, he kind of caught me kind of a thing. And I was like, I'm so sorry. Like I was embarrassed about that. But I just made fun of myself about it. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, of course, leave it to Stacy, of course she would stumble and fall. And yeah. I do think too, to kind of wrap up this portion of the conversation, I think one of the important things is, and something that I admire the most in you, is how I see you building a solid foundation in your home. You're a present father. You're trying to be involved. You want what's right for your children. And I think that that is something that we need across the board in all homes right now, whether they're homeschool or public school. Do you feel like the kids that you see in that when you're volunteering in the community, do you see that?
Well, it's hard to say exactly all their situations, but me personally, I'll share, my dad had some issues with alcohol, and I had to lean heavily on my grandfather and my coaches. And so it was a challenging time for me as a youth. And so I get that. And I think too, like when I'm dealing with children, they're late to practice, they have an attitude, maybe they're upset about something. You have to think like a lot of those things may not necessarily be under their control. Like there's stuff that's happening in their life, especially a kid shows up to practice late. I'm not going to chew them out as if they're under a certain age because, they have no control over that. And I think that whether there's a dad in the house or not, obviously I believe in families. And I think that, and that's just I mean, obviously I think mom and a dad is the best, but I think if you have a grandfather, you have other influences as well, because girls need their moms, boys need their dads,
Yeah.
and then they need each other too.
Yep.
So I think that if I can be that male figure, even the tiniest amount of time that I have with the kids that I'm in contact with, they at least see a positive role model in their life, and they can see like, well, this is what a dad should be. Or they see like, because a lot of times I have my kids there too. So they see like, oh, this is what a dad looks like to his son or his daughter. Share a story. When I was a kid in high school, one of the players on my team, his name was Josh Reddy. He played nose tackle and I played tackle on defense and on the varsity level. And his dad, it was kind of a cheesy thing, but his dad would see him at practice and he was a junior in high school. And I remember just seeing this and observing, and his dad would say, "Hey, Josh, I love you." And he'd give him a big hug and a kiss. And I thought, that is the weirdest thing. Like a dad, hugging and embracing his son like that and telling him he loves him. But even though it seemed weird to me, it was like, you know what? I wish I had that. I wish I at least had, someone telling me that, someone supporting me, someone being like my biggest fan
Yeah.
and like hoping that I succeed and someone that I can call and say, "Hey, I did it." So maybe I could be that to somebody else.
Yeah, I definitely agree. My daughter's father passed away when she was 5, and my husband's been in her life since she was 5 as well. So she's always had like that male, but I do find myself trying to fill that void. And I think you're absolutely correct that, the girls need their moms, but there is also that extent of needing their dads and stuff. I go above and beyond for her at her like sporting events and anything that she does because I know that if her dad was here, I mean, he would be that obnoxious parent with the cowbell, even at the choir concert or something so like loud and obnoxious because of how proud he would be. And I think you're absolutely correct. Having that and is something that, a kid definitely looks forward to. And so between my husband and I, we both definitely try to like fill that void for her because and so I definitely agree that seeing that is helpful for the children. Welcome back to my conversation with Frank Freeman. Back to your city council campaign. What do you feel like was the biggest lesson that you learned?
Well, there were a lot of lessons. Some of them were mainly around who to trust, who to not trust, what are the intentions of certain folks. There's a lot of people who want power. They may be in it for different reasons, and you may agree or disagree with. I felt like I dodged a lot of bullets. There were certain folks that basically wanted me to be someone that they can control and tell what to do and how to vote. And I just did not think that obviously that's in the best interest of our community if one person is telling someone how to vote. So I learned a lot about that, but I also learned a lot about what matters most to people in our community. And it's like, at the end of the day, they want to know their families are safe, their families are fed, that their kids have a chance to be successful, that we're all kind of in the same position and we're all trying to get to the same place to some extent. And that we can, if I can talk to that and encourage those around me to try to achieve that and be better about that, I think we'll just have a much better place that we live in. And so to my takeaway, I don't know if I'd ever do it again, but I know that certain things matter to people, and that's what we need to focus on. Not a lot of the minutia and all this sound that's bouncing off everywhere. We need to focus on what's important to the people of our community and try to find a way to deliver that to them.
I agree. In my campaign, I got a lot of, oh, she's just a mouthpiece for so and so. She's a mouthpiece for so and so. If she gets elected, she's going to do this or that or the other. And a lot of it was scare tactics, right? So then it was always like so important for me to be like, no, just because. I associate with this person does not mean that they have influence over me. And it opened my eyes to how many people, I mean, I know as a society, we don't have a lot of Christians, right? Like that's not the common theme anymore, but especially in politics. And it was so bewildering to me how many people are not Christians, or if they claim to be Christians, don't truly just rely on God and
Sure.
doing what he says and what is best. And so then they want to control how you vote or think that they're going to have input over it. And for example, like the book complaints. A lot of people told me not to do it as a candidate. Oh, you don't want to get involved with that. And it may have done my campaign damage for doing it. But at the end of the day, I spent a lot of time in prayer
Mhm.
thinking about that, trying to figure out what is the best way. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I want to be able to say, I did everything I could. Whether it got me elected or not, I fought for those kids. I fought for what was important. And oftentimes I get people who say, oh, you just need to worry about your own kids. Stop trying to worry about everybody else's kids. But they're not seeing the bigger picture that I couldn't imagine the guilt that I would feel if a child that I knew or had some type of influence in their life over that something bad happened to them. Just the guilt that I would feel for that. And so it's like, if I know that I'm fighting for these kids to try to protect them, even if they're not mine, like that's more important to me than
Sure.
what you think about me, keyboard warrior on Facebook. In terms of like, oh, just worry about your own kids. And I definitely felt like that was something that I had learned was that a lot of people will say they want what's best for the children, but really they just want to satisfy whoever their
Mhm.
puppeteer is or whoever, like you were saying, the person trying to get them to vote a certain way.
Yeah.
They will go against what I think they truly believe is right just to satisfy those. And I know that there's been other people who were elected that went against the people who helped to get them elected. And then they would say, well, I got you elected. You need to do this for me because I got you elected. And that's not right at all.
Well, at the end of the day, when you're standing in front of our Lord and Savior, how do you want to be received, right? And so at the end of the day, yeah, I would have loved to be in this position and do these things, but if it required me to compromise my own beliefs and my own standards and morals, is that really something that I should be doing? And so I think you and I both know the answer to that. So at the end of the day, and I know a lot about your campaign, you stood on a solid ground and a solid foundation. And whether they were ready to hear that or not, it was the right thing to do.
Yeah. I think the same would go for you as well. I mean, I know that you got a lot of backlash for even associating with Ashley and I in any capacity because we were the crazy school board ladies or whatever. And that may not have reflected in the best light
Sure.
for you. And honestly, please correct me if I'm wrong. They didn't really have any grounds for what they were saying. It was just more so of
Fear. They're trying to fear tactic me.
yeah, we were standing against something and they were afraid that we would get momentum and have a valid point. And so I think that just definitely showed to us, not just me, but like the whole campaign team, what kind of a person that you were willing to say, you know what? I know that this is what you guys think, but I'm not going to listen to what you're saying because at the end of the day, that's not right.
Well, there came a point in time where I honestly firmly believes thinking about and looking at the kids that I coach, looking them in the eye and thinking, is it okay for you to have a substandard result in school? Is it okay? Okay, well, I'm not running for school board, but we'll see you again. And what will you look like? Will you look like someone doing something they want to do or someone doing something they have to do? And if they have an opportunity to be better and do better, I feel like it to me, it just made perfect sense that the schools work with the city
Yeah.
and that those all kind of converge together in one way or another, because at the end of the day, when we're making the city a better place for financially and housing and all those things, who do we want to be to fill those positions? Who do we want to live in those houses? Who do we want? We want a certain type of citizen, right? We want a certain type of employee. We want people who will have opportunities to have these tech jobs or these high paying positions that do occur in our town, to be able to stay in the town that they grew up in and thrive in the town and continue to add back to our towns rather than having to go somewhere else and doing that. So to me, it made perfect sense that this kind of ecosystem of education and civics and all this stuff just kind of works together because we're all trying to build towards the same end result.
Yeah. Well, and I think that was a reason why a lot of the people, whether they were realtors or lenders or just anybody trying to get stuff in the city, any of those influencers were against us was because if we got elected or if we had a platform to say this is what's wrong with our public education system, nobody would want to come to the city because they don't want to put their kids in this public school system because they're gonna have to pay for private school. They're gonna have to, try a homeschooling or a charter school or something. And instead of taking the approach of saying, you know what, let's invest in our kids. Let's
Yes.
truly invest in our kids across the state. Public school proficiency rates are crap, but even in our district, we're still lower than a lot of the other ones. And so how do we counter that? And instead of doing that, it was more of a, oh, don't vote for Stacey and Ashley. Pretend like what they're saying is not true because that's what's better for the economy, the bringing in new businesses and that appeal to high tech people that we want to come in. And I think that's kind of crappy too because
Well, we're trying to build towards excellence,
yeah,
right? If we are. And how do you do that? You don't lie and make numbers up and say this is okay and we're okay with the status quo. No, we keep pushing forward. We keep demanding more out of everything. And I think what you guys were talking about and how that whole campaign happened, I was very much like, what is going on here? We're okay with our results. Why are we okay with this? We, at the very least, even if you're saying like we're working hard and we're doing good things, can we do more good things?
yeah. Yep. But I mean, that's always the thing that they talk about, like at school board meetings. It's a dog and pony show. Oh, look at, we're doing so great. We're doing so great. An example would be for Greeley West. They are the IB school for the district. And they were like, our IB student enrollment has tripled. Okay, well, what they didn't tell you was that they are requiring all freshmen and sophomores to take IB English classes. So your numbers are tripling, correct? But because you're forcing them to, like, and I'm not necessarily saying that the kids shouldn't be challenged or whatever, but if they're not prepared, if they're not ready for that level of class, then why are we forcing them to do it? This is supposed to be like a really elite opportunity for the kids. And so are your numbers organically multiplying or is it because you're forcing it? And if it's because you're forcing it, is that really what it appears
Yeah.
to be kind of a thing, like you're making it sound good instead of saying like, "Hey, we've had some good conversations with the kids and really want to challenge them. We've tried to restructure the way that kids view IB. A lot of kids don't want to do it. They don't want to challenge themselves, something along those lines. Instead of having that conversation, they're just saying, "Yep, nope,
Mm.
look at us. We're doing so good. Everything's great. Everything's fine. Don't worry about it." And I kind of felt the same way too at State of the City that went on a couple of weeks ago was like, everything's great. Everything's perfect here. West 10th gets shut down at least once a week because of a nasty car accident. Like, is it really great?
Yeah. I don't know. Like, I think a lot of what happens in the background too, I've seen various city council meetings and our town actually has a very good behavior as far as inviting businesses and having some cooperation. Now, I think there's still good to have a little bit of dissent. And I think we tend to have a lot more agreement, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I think we should have more conversation about where we disagree. And I feel like some of our leaders too, the leaders that are currently in there now in city council, they work very hard and make those meetings and they show up and they make their presence known. I just think that a lot of our leaders, and this is not just in the city, but that they can get out and actually speak to people more and be a part of the community more. One thing when I was running, I was so worried because I'm like, man, there's so many houses and people to talk to. How am I going to get to everybody? And my wife was like, well, we've lived here 20 years and we've never had a single person come to our door to talk to us about anything other than religion and pest control. So we've never had anyone come to our door to talk to us about city council. And so take that pressure off. But we should have more of them out in the community, talking to people, getting to know people. I didn't even know who our representatives were until I started to run. So to me, I think if they're making a heavier effort to do that, I think they will be able to address the concerns of our community better.
I definitely agree. I think one thing that I wished we could have done differently with our campaigns was I feel like we spent a lot of time educating people
Mm.
as opposed to introducing ourselves and getting to know people and having, conversations as opposed to this is just who I am. This is I want, to introduce you, give me some feedback that you have for the public schools. Just some of those conversations
Mm.
instead of educating of what's really going on or how we could improve. And a lot of people didn't want to hear about improvement because they believe that everything's going great.
Yep.
So
I think the establishment has built kind of a fortress around getting information. Like they have their own way of distributing that information. And so they have their own fortress around that. So you guys coming in to try to share more information, they thought they already knew.
yeah,
So yeah, and I that was an uphill battle.
I definitely agree. Definitely agree. And that's, part of the reason of doing this podcast is to try to help one, educate people. We have so many amazing opportunities for education in the state. So what are all of our options? What works for one person may not work for another person. Some people are like, oh, you take your, kid to that school. Oh, I had all of these problems. Well, we're never going to find anything that's perfect across the board for everything. And so it's better to just have an educational conversation and that's what I'm hoping to do with this podcast is to try to use this to one educate people about options but two about what's going on and to encourage them to start to pay more attention
Mm.
and to get more involved and have a better understanding. The school board meetings are so boring. I often wish I could stab myself in the eye with a rusty spoon, but it's important because if I didn't go, then I wouldn't know about some of these things that they're applauding themselves for that I'm like, "Wait a minute, I know the truth behind this, and that's not right."
Yeah. Well, we have one life to live and we should make the best out of it. And I think sharing that with the youth in our community, hey, you got one chance at this. Let's make it great. And I think when we talk about how do we make it great, well, maybe what we're doing right now, it's kind of getting us there, but maybe we want to do something else or we want to be a certain way. And somehow getting that message to them and to their families, and then actually getting them out to vote because that was the biggest setback is our number in voting.
I agree. Well, that does it for this week's episode. Thank you, Frank, so much for
Thank
joining
you.
me. I know that you are actively trying to get on the board of governors for university.
Yes.
So I just want to wish you
Yeah.
the best of
Thank
luck
you.
with that. And I think that you would be a great person. I believe that as an influence on children and someone who would make decisions, I would have utmost confidence in your ability to do that. So thank you so much for coming on, and I hope you join us again sometime.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.